Hello, thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is David Lummis. I'm the Director of Society and Politics.
And I'm Amanda E., the Vice President of the Political Science Student Association at UW-Madison.
Before we begin, we would like to take this time to thank the Wisconsin Union for graciously allowing us to use their space during these trying times. And we'd also like to thank Wheelhouse Studios for helping us present tonight's show. And without further ado, we are incredibly excited to host former Deputy White House Chief of Operations, current Crooked Media podcast host, best-selling author, and UW-Madison alum, Alyssa Mastromonaco. Hi, Alyssa. How are you this evening?
Hi, you guys. Thank you for having me. Proud Badger should always lead my intro.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We are so excited to have you tonight. So before we get into some of your more recent accomplishments and talk about all the really, really cool things that you've done, we're going to take a step back and maybe talk a little bit about your time as a Badger, your first few years out. So you began your career at the University of Vermont and finished it here in Madison, Wisconsin. You then, and please stop me if I miss anything, began a whirlwind of a career. You first interned for Senator Bernie Sanders, then worked as a paralegal, served as an assistant to John Kerry, worked as a lobbyist briefly, then as press secretary for Virginia Congressman Rich Boucher, before finally joining the staff of U.S. Senate hopeful Barack Obama. That is quite the list of accomplishments.
It is. And you know what everybody should know is that Bernie was in large part responsible, not necessarily responsible for me going to Madison, but by the time I had met him in Vermont, I was like, oh my God, I should never leave. It's so wonderful. Like I loved being his intern and I'm like, maybe I should never leave Burlington. And he told me Madison was the cradle of the progressive movement. And so I had to go.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating.
And for just, this is a good one that I don't think was in any of my books, but he hooked me up with his friend, Ed Garvey. Some of you may know Ed Garvey. He ran for governor and Senate in Wisconsin, literally the leader of the progressive movement, helped unionize the NFL Players Association. I came to work for him when I was in Madison for 2 full years. And when I got arrested for having a fake ID at Paul's Club, he helped get me out of some trouble.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating.
Love the story.
So, going into college, what were your career plans and did they change over the course of your college career?
Sure. So one of the interesting things is that I didn't really have career plans. I knew things that I was interested in, and I was lucky enough that my parents sort of let me figure out, what really spoke to me. And so when I was at the University of Vermont, I was actually a French major with a minor in Japanese language. And it was after meeting Bernie, and it's always an important distinction for me that Bernie helped me get involved in public service, not necessarily politics. And so I changed my major when I went out to Madison. I was actually transferring to Madison because UVM wasn't offering a French major anymore. But I got to Madison, I changed my major, I became a poli-sci major. And the truth is, and again, something that's so important for all of you guys to know, every single job I have had as an adult, I did not know existed when I was in college. So who knows that there is a White House deputy chief of staff or what jobs really exist in the White House other than, working in the White House. So no, after I was done in Madison, which was such a great time. I can't even tell you, all of my former roommates from 11 East Gilman were on the text chain today talking about how I was doing this. After I left college, there weren't any jobs in political science really that I could find anywhere. So I ended up doing a bunch of random jobs that all, again, an important lesson, even though none of the jobs seemed to make sense for what I wanted to do, which I thought was work in a congressional office or on a campaign or for one of the committees, it's like I ended up being a paralegal, a real estate paralegal. Like, what on earth does that have to do? Well, I learned how to work in an office environment. I learned how to get along with colleagues. I learned about teamwork, things that you don't necessarily do in college. So honestly, I never really had a path. So not too much really ever had to change.
So was that paralegal job your first job out of school, or did you do something else more in the service field as well?
No, paralegal was my first job out of school. I was a commercial real estate paralegal in the original World Trade Center.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking back on your time at college, is there anything you wish you would have done differently? Or I guess, are you happy with how things turned out?
I am so happy with how things turned out. And one thing that I would say to everyone, there's so much stress about getting a job when you get out. And truthfully, here's some truths. One, being a good, interesting person gets you a lot farther than you would think. One of the things that I am so grateful for now, at the time, I don't know what I was thinking, but there were just classes I'd see, in the course catalog. And I mean, please understand that signing up for classes back in 1995, 96, 94, whatever, took a lot of effort. You used to have to go to the gym and then wait online for the class, or you'd have to call on the phone and hope you ever got through. So, it's not just like I could sign up online or anything like that. But I took one of my favorite classes that I ever took in Madison was forensic pathology, which I think did sort of like lay the groundwork for my Law and Order obsession for the rest of my life. But not everyone at a dinner party can be like, did you know if you were murdered in Wisconsin in 1995 that you had a 33% chance of being dismembered? So I think that for me, so much of what I was really lucky about is that I took classes that I think made me an interesting, well-rounded person. So I feel like that's like my biggest sort of success in college.
Interesting. So that kind of actually answers the next question we wanted to ask you. But that was, looking back at your career, is there anything of really great value that you really took away? Maybe it was a class, maybe it was a club, maybe it was just a conversation. But is there anything that really jumps out to you as something that's really helped you and shaped who you've been since?
Yeah, one of the things, just in the vein of, I liked to take things that were interesting. So here's the thing, as the title of my second book goes. Sometimes taking the class that you think is interesting isn't the class you'll necessarily do the best in, right? You don't know that, but sometimes you look and you're like, well, why would Alyssa, who was raised without religion, ever take Hebrew? Yeah, Hebrew and translation, I think it was. And the funny thing is that I brought such curiosity to the class, and I was so interested in learning that I actually got the highest grade in the class. I'm pretty sure. I know I at least got the highest grade on the final and the midterm, but and the teacher pointed that out. She's like, this is what happens when you bring curiosity to what you're doing. And so I think that for as much as I learned both at Madison, and curiosity is one of the core tenets of Barack Obama, that if you're not curious, what are you even doing? That being curious shows respect in other people's culture and their ideas and their thoughts. So I think that I really got that start both with Bernie and in Madison. And then of course, with Obama.
So after graduating from UW-Madison, Alyssa began her career in politics as a staff member for former Senator John Kerry. And shortly after, Alyssa worked on former President Obama's Senate campaign when he was an Illinois state senator. When President Obama was elected as president, Alyssa was appointed as the director of scheduling and advance for his administration. 3 years later, she became his deputy chief of staff for operations. First of all, unlike many in his administration, you began working for former President Obama when he was still a senator in Illinois. What did you see in him that convinced you to join his staff so early on?
So I had actually just finished up the Kerry campaign when then Senator, now Secretary Kerry, ran for president in 2004. And this is another one of those life lessons about always remembering you never want to burn a bridge. You never know when you're going to cross paths with people ever again, and especially in politics. And so Robert Gibbs, who some of you may remember, went on to be White House press secretary. Gibbs had actually been working for Obama's Senate race, and he knew that Kerry lost. And so he sent me an AOL instant message that said, "How are you? Do you need work?" And I was like, "I do need work." And part of the reason that I went to work for Barack Obama is because I just wanted to do public service. Losing a race is really hard. I don't recommend it. And So I was like, this is great. Here's this man. He's super passionate. He gave this amazing speech at the convention. I know he's really here to help the people. You know, he's not just some politician who truly, like, I know it sounds crazy to say this now, but he was not someone when you met him then or ever in his life is someone who's like, I just want to be the most powerful person. And so I just found that really appealing. And so we interviewed, and then it was right before Christmas in 2004 when he left me a voicemail that said, Alyssa, it's Obama. Let's do this. True story.
Wow, wow, that's really impressive. Going off of that, what went into being former President Obama's master of logistics? Could you maybe walk us through a normal day in the life of being the Deputy Chief of Staff and Operations?
Sure. Well, let me tell you, the first day, the first official day, I think it was the first official day that I was White House Deputy Chief, my dear friend David Axelrod was having his going away party for leaving the White House. And I get home to my little apartment. I'm getting ready to change for a night out. And I get a call from the Situation Room that says there are AMCITs, which is shorthand for American citizens, in Cairo who need to be evacuated. This was the day that Hosni Mubarak was being deposed in Egypt. And I was like, okay. And I hung up and I was like, okay, shit, how do I do this? How do I get American citizens out of Cairo? And, you know, the truth is that in any situation, when you find yourself in any situation like that, just ask questions. So I called back the Situation Room and I was like, where should we start? And so that was my first day. We got them out. They were all from, I can still remember, they were from Downers Grove, Illinois. So for me, one, kind of important to know that in my bedroom, which was very, very small, I had a secure computer and a red phone and a yellow phone. The red phone, if it rang in the middle of the night, was very bad news. And the yellow phone was like less bad news. And then I had a secure computer so that I could send emergency emails that would be classified. The reason it was terrible to have in my bedroom is because it was like 1,000 degrees and it was always on. And my cat used to like lean up against it to make himself warm. But sometimes I could get a phone call at 3 a.m. saying there's a nuclear meltdown. That there is, not in America, in another country, that there was a terrible shooting, that there was a forest fire, a wildfire, that the president of the United States had just been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, sky was sort of the limit between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. But normally we would get to the office, and by office, I mean the West Wing, sometime between 6 and 7 in the morning. 6 and 7 in the morning. We had a senior staff meeting in the chief of staff's office that was about 12 of us. It started around 7:30. Then we had a bigger meeting in the Roosevelt room about around 8:30. And in these meetings, you were talking both about the urgent issues facing the president, the administration, all of us that day, and then also some longer term issues that we might need, resolution to. So, you know, it's an interesting thing to get to know all your colleagues at 7 a.m. And then normally for me as White House Deputy Chief around, I took a break. So the 8:30 meeting usually got out around 9:30. Between 9:30 and 10, I would eat breakfast if I hadn't already, which was usually oatmeal or an English muffin. And then around 10:15 started a series of meetings with all of my direct reports. Sometimes daily, sometimes several times a week. So for me, that meant the White House Military Office. The White House Military Office encompasses the 18 acres, which you would know as the White House campus, Camp David, Air Force One, Marine One. Yes, I figured out where the seats on Air Force One go on the new plane sometimes, which I think Donald Trump tried to change, but we don't think about that too much. What else? It included classified and unclassified construction projects, neither of which I can talk about. Presidential personnel. So that meant I was responsible for overseeing the vetting, nomination, confirmation of cabinet secretaries, DepSecs, assistant secretaries, and other political appointees. Scheduling in advance, which I had formerly led, which controls every person that the president sees, every place he goes, liaises with foreign governments about foreign travel, and organizes all domestic trips in conjunction with the National Security Council, policy teams, and comms. Then what else? What else did I oversee, you guys? I'm forgetting things, but that's about right. That's about right. So and normally we'd have a wrap-up meeting. There was usually one meeting with the president at some point during the day. And then at night, there was a wrap-up meeting. And I usually got home between like 7:30 and 10.
Wow, that is a long work day. What was your favorite part of serving in the White House?
What was my favorite part of serving in the White House? Honestly, guys, it's just like it's the people. You know, I mean, there are a few jobs in your life where everyone shows up to work with the same mission, right? And even if you're part of the comms team or the policy team or the econ team, every person there is truly, past administration aside, truly, and it's not a partisan thing, it's like an execution thing. Every single person of any administration I've ever met has one goal, and that's just serving the American people and making sure that by the time you leave work that day, that you have gotten done more than is probably humanly possible. My favorite day of the year was always the egg roll. Even though I don't have kids, there is something about seeing the joy on that South Lawn of people enjoying the house, as we would call it, the White House. And the other thing is that Mrs. Obama, who I had known for a very, very long time, her number one priority was making sure that everybody understood it was the people's house. So anytime there was an event where, you know, like Halloween, if you look back on the pictures of Halloween with the Obamas, where they would open it up to all the kids of DC and they would hand out candy. I mean, anything like that where the beauty and the power of that building is shared was like a good day.
Great. And another question that we have for you is, what was your experience like as a woman in what has traditionally been a male-dominated field?
Well, for me, you know, it's always, for me, it's an important distinction because on the one hand, yes, I was a woman. On the other hand, I was very young. And so sometimes when people would treat me differently, I would always think to myself, like, why are they treating me differently? And sometimes it's just that every other person that I was in the room with was like 65 or older. And people, you know, so it's really part of my job was bringing people along, for lack of a better description, for making people understand why Barack Obama gave me the job and helping them understand that I wasn't just like some brat who got lucky and felt entitled. You know, for me, it was always, you know, if there's one, again, piece of advice I could give anyone listening, it's that if you are ever in an uncomfortable situation or you're feeling uncertain in a new job or anything, one of the best things you can do, like one of the greatest ways to show respect, is by asking questions. And for me, especially with a group, say like the White House Military Office, which is 3,500 members of the military, of which, because I was their boss, I think I had the official rank of a 3 or 4-star general. And when I walked into the room the first time, they saluted me. And I was like, you never need to do that again. Like, we're a team. I need you. You need me. And, you know, when I had my first meeting with them, the binder of prep that they gave me was several hundred pages. And I employed my assistant to help me get ready for it. And he's like, here's all the things that you know, right? Like just by osmosis, by having been in the White House for 2 years, here's all the things you know. And I was like, but what don't I know? And I'm like, I think I should go in and I should start by asking them questions because it shows respect for the job and the knowledge that they have. So, you know, for me, that was an important way to sort of diffuse any potential, she's a young woman or she's just a young person. But like there were times when I felt like people would say things to me that they'd never say to the dudes. And I think that part of it is bravado I didn't really walk. I didn't think I did. I didn't. I've since learned that I had a bit of a swagger, that I had a bit of a, not that long ago, I interviewed Congresswoman Madeline Dean, who was one of the impeachment House floor managers. Her son is younger than I am, but he worked in the comms shop under Dan Pfeiffer, who is my best friend. And she said, Pat says you're very intimidating. And I was like, that is wild that people keep saying that. And I think it's just, I think it's because I was like pretty confident and not confident in an overbearing way, confident like I knew what I knew and I knew what I didn't know. And knowing what you don't know is as important as knowing what you do know, because you don't make an asshole of yourself when you ask questions instead of assuming, So for me, look, there was one time when this very mean conservative blog was like attacking my outfits. And I walked into the Oval Office and I sat down one day for a meeting with all the other senior advisors. And at the end, Obama was like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "Nothing." He's like, "I've known you too long. What's wrong?" And I was like, "Honestly, there's this blog and they say that I disrespect you because I don't wear high heels." And he's like, "Well, let me ask you a question. Why don't you wear high heels?" I'm like, "Because you're also freaking tall. It's like walking with gazelles. I'm like a hamster and you're like gazelles. I have to keep up. So I wear flat shoes." He's like, "Well, then why do you care? Why do you care what they say?" And I was like, "Well, I don't want to represent you badly." And he's like, "But if I don't care, why do you care?" And I was like, "All right, that's a very good point." And so, things like that, though, none of the men got ever attacked for having, not wearing pantyhose. Can you believe that's a thing? I was attacked for not wearing pantyhose, or high heel shoes. So that's definitely different. I'm just so lucky that I had a boss who was like, "Fuck that."
Yeah. And another question that we had for you is, in your opinion, your eyes, would you say that the Obama administration at your time was diverse enough?
Oh, I would say that any of us would always say it could have been more diverse. I think that the number one thing that the president, look, you always want to be a part of something where you see yourself reflected. And I think that for a long time, public service, if you saw public servant, especially people that you saw on television who worked in the White House, they were mostly white. And so I think that we could have been more diverse. I think that we did a good job of trying to make the case that public service is for everyone.
Great. And the last question for this little subcategory here, how is campaigning different from actually working in the government? And
No, go ahead.
And going off of that, sorry, what are some good ways for college students like us to get a good feel for either of them?
So one, I would say interning is a great way. It really showed me the difference between the two. And you really have to put in the effort. And let me just be clear, like when I was an intern, I think now many internships pay as they should. When I was an intern, I had multiple jobs to be able to afford my internships. Even though my parents were super, super supportive, it was just always important for them to see that I really wanted these opportunities. And by showing I wanted them, it meant babysitting and being a maitre d' and a hostess throughout the week to be able to afford it. But for me, I think that in college, it's like, think of everything as bite size. Like the number one thing is make sure your grades are great. Number two is always make sure that you're like able to pay your bills, right? And then you don't need to have massive time commitments to show your dedication or get a flavor for what is out there. So I would say for anyone who is interested, find something find a candidate that appeals to you or an elected official that appeals to you, and see, even if it is opening the mail for 2 hours a week, see if you can get in to do it. Because like for me, when I first started working for John Kerry, my job was to answer the phones. And the truth is, I learned more about Massachusetts and the problems facing the people of Massachusetts by answering the phones than I would have if I had had some policy job. And the most important thing to Bernie Sanders when I started in the Burlington office, I used to get the task sometimes of picking him up at the airport. And the first time I got to pick him up at the airport, I prepared. I got up so early. I prepared so hard. I read the New York Times and the Washington Post. And when I got in the car, he said, "Tell me what's happening." And I started talking about articles I had read in the Times and the Post. He's like, "I don't care about that. What's happening in the Northeast Kingdom? What's happening in Brattleboro? What's happening up by Lake Champlain?" And so it taught me all politics is local, which we know to be true. And so I would just say, even if you don't have a lot of time to dedicate, just try to do it. Because the other thing is too, if you're someone who has volunteered for 2 hours a week and you don't flake and you show up at the same time every week and people can always count on you, you will get noticed. I guarantee it. People will take note. They will remember you. And when you either apply for an internship or a staff job at some point, I really, in my core of core, people will be like, you know what? Like, they put in the work and they get it. And just the experience of having done it just a little bit, people know that you don't think that this is some crazy glamorous job. Like, even if the stories that I tell you about my time in the White House were glamorous, the 15 years leading up to that, or however long it was, were not entirely glamorous. There was a lot of phone answering and faxing and cutting clips and faxing them. So I think that that's important. And then what was the first part of the question? I answered the second half first.
Yeah, I guess, like, how is campaigning different from working in government?
So super conflict averse. I know that anyone who follows me on Twitter may not believe that right now, or at least for the last 4 years. But I don't really like politicking. Like, in the beginning of the campaign in 2008, so it would have been 2007, when then Senator Obama and then Senator Clinton would like fight with each other on debate stages. I mean, it's a debate. I mean, they weren't doing anything like specific to each other. It was just the debate. Oh, I'd get so upset I couldn't even look. So to me, campaigns and organizing are so important because it's how you make change, right? It's how you get the opportunity to push through policy changes. To me, governing is taking all that work and making it policy. And the thing that I like about governing is that, and public service, is that you get to think like a year, 2 years, 4 years down the line, whereas campaigning is such a you got to win every single day. And even though in the White House you kind of want to win every day, it's not the same. So for people who are just like super adrenaline junkies who love to fight and love to get in the mud, and I don't mean that like you're, not a good person, but like if, you really thrive on just going, campaigning is for you. I mean, governing can be for you too, but if you're someone who really likes to sit down and sink your teeth into something and know that you've got a little bit of runway, then governing might be for you.
Fascinating. So after leaving the White House in 2014, you entered the world of media, first with Marie Claire, followed by stops at Vice Media, and now Crooked Media. Seems like you're the thing for sinister standing media companies, no?
I do think media is so interesting because when you think about the job of the people in the White House, so much of it is storytelling, right? How do you tell the story of what the president is doing? How do you communicate it? And, one of my favorite disagreements with Dan Pfeiffer, there's literally only one. We have always found common ground, except this one time when we were getting enrollment was opening up for the ACA, and they wanted to get as many people as they could the message that enrollment was open. And so Dan Pfeiffer and Valerie Jarrett were like, Barack Obama should do Between Two Ferns with Zach Galifianakis. And I just lost my ever-loving mind. I was like, this is crazy. This is unpresidential. Just imagine for a minute how funny, not funny, sad I thought the Trump administration was when I was like, oh my God, I thought Zach Galifianakis was unpresidential. Look what we're in the middle of. But I really went to war, and it came down to the president being like, I agree with Valerie and Dan, and I was so upset. And when I watched it, it was very funny. And I think to this day, it has something like 42 million views. And so to me, though, it was interesting because I was like, okay, who am I and like who were these people that watched it and why was I so wrong? And so I became very interested in how media, especially back then it was called new media, communicated. And so I left the White House, and it took me a couple months to find what my next thing was. But I met Shane Smith, who is the CEO of Vice, and I went to Williamsburg to the headquarters there. And, you know, the number one thing that I felt when I walked into that building was that it felt like a campaign, and it felt like home. I was like, I got this. I can do this. I may not know tons about media, but I know I can figure this out. And so when I was there, I helped oversee the launch of Vice News on the new Vice Daily Show on HBO, of Viceland, which is, you know, on linear television. And through that whole time, one of the things I became so interested in was like, well, here's digital media. Where does linear media fit in? And so that's when I actually left, and I went to one of our board members at Vice was A&E Networks, which owns the History Channel, Lifetime, LMN, FYI, a couple other channels, Viceland. And I said, you know, let me go learn about linear television. And again, it's like all these old school, like media, like network people were like, who is this woman? And I just came in with all the questions. And I was like, wait a minute, but what if this, then that? And they'd be like, oh my God, that's crazy. And so it's funny because they were actually very open-minded, which I appreciated. And then I actually left. I started my podcast on Crooked Media Hysteria. But I really just couldn't work in a corporate environment anymore because like I basically was waking up. This happened more than once when I woke up in the morning and my face was on like CBS Morning News or Morning Joe because I had tweeted something that people thought was very important, but also a little bit, I guess, insane if you represent a corporation. And I just felt like I was lucky enough that, you know, I'd save money. And so I was like, maybe I just shouldn't work in a specific job for a while. And I volunteered. My first big gig was to help NARAL, National Abortion Action Rights League, try to stop the Kavanaugh confirmation. And from that point, I just helped the activists and organizers as much as I knew. But no, I love podcasting. I was telling Amanda and David right before I got on today, I got to interview Secretary Clinton for the podcast. So please check it out on Thursday because it's very fun. But yeah, I love podcasting because you can just reach people all over the world. And it's like, I mean, sometimes you've got to Zoom, but for the most part, you can just, it's like, it's very, sometimes it's unnerving when you do television because you get so self-conscious about how you look. But for some reason on Zoom, like none of us really brought it today. And we were all like, hey, how are you? It's so good to see you. So anyway, podcasting is a lot of fun.
That's really fascinating how you went almost full circle from progressive do-gooder coming out of college to progressive do-gooder having now worked at the top levels in both the media and the government.
And now I'm just a progressive tweeter.
So what aspects of the media world have been the most enjoyable for you personally?
The most enjoyable part is, for the most part, there's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of running room to create content that you think people might enjoy. And as someone who, since she was a child, has consumed a pretty fair amount of television, I realize that CBS is on in the background. That for me, it was being able to tell other people's stories. You know, you find someone who's got a great story, you read an article, and you're like, oh my God, can we find a way to make this better, to make more people see it, to impact some conversation that's happening. So I think that's probably the best part.
Interesting. So now kind of jumping ahead to your current role at Crooked Media. What is the Crooked Media crew like? And I should ask, this is from a number of fans here that have been helping working on this project to all listen to the various different podcasts that you guys put out.
Oh, you guys, come on. I love it. I mean, first of all, it was founded by 3 of my dearest friends. It is one, they're so open to ideas. It's just such a fun, I haven't been out to Crooked Media since going out to Crooked was one of my last 2 trips before the pandemic. And it was funny because we had decided that it would be so great if I could be there more in person, that we had set it up so I'd go out for a couple days every month to help come up with ideas and all that kind of stuff, for new podcasts or guests or, even other things that we could be doing. But I don't know what people would specifically like to know about them. I mean, they're all my friends, so I love them dearly. I have specifically known Jon Favreau since the day after he graduated college. He is the brother I've never had. The one thing that is really fun, and if anyone is watching, has not seen it, we've done several sort of one-off podcasts, but Pfeiffer and I, it's like if he and I are just like, let's be honest, like Pfeiffer and I don't FaceTime, we text. And I'm like, it's a crazy story. And he'll be like, what? And we'll text back and forth. And we're like, should we pitch a pod, like, and try to do a podcast about it? And so we were actually able to do that over the summer on our podcast series called That's the Ticket, which was part of Pod Save America, about how you go about picking a vice president. And I think that one of the things too that they're interested in, and that the Crooked fans are interested in, is like, we all have opinions, but we also really try to explain how things are. Like my video series called Let's Break It Down literally came from, and this is a great thing too, like I am unfortunately someone who reads my comments, and sometimes they're shitty, but sometimes they're really helpful. And so people said, we wish that there was just something you could do that would help make us smarter so that we could understand big events that are happening, like what goes into them, why they're important, how they normally happen. And so anyway, my video series, Let's Break It Down, is like, it's not an explainer exactly, but it's where I pick someone I love and who I've worked with, and we just break it down. And it's amazing through the Crooked family how, I think that over the Trump years, I worried a little bit that people were really into like entertainment and things being salacious, and, that maybe facts really had fallen by the wayside. But in the Crooked universe, I think that that's one of the best parts, is that people really do want to know how things actually work. And so that's what I'm good at. So it's been very fun.
So funny you mentioned your show with Dan, because the next question actually relates to the first episode of your show, That's the Ticket. We're curious what the vetting process is like for presidential nominees. Are there certain characteristics that either make a candidate stand out or disqualify them immediately? Could you kind of walk us through what these conversations are like internally?
Sure. So a couple things. What you're looking for in a vice president is always dependent on who the presidential nominee is. That's number one. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes you want to look at, when people go into the voting booth, what do they think I'm missing? And what kind of vice president might not compensate, but who adds to the ticket, right? You always want someone who is bringing something to the ticket. So you would want to find out, you go through finances. Look, some of the questionnaires are like, have you watched porn? After this whole Matt Gaetz situation, that question seems trite, but you want to find out what they have done for work, what clients they've had when they went to school, what did they write about? Did they have dissertations? Have they written articles that people should know about? Have they supported candidates? Have they signed petitions that might be objectionable in this day and age? Who knows? You want to find out, are they healthy? Are they in good health? Are they committed? Do they want it? Some people, I don't know, some people are like, nah, I'm good. I've never met one. I'm assuming they're out there, but I think they're like, nah, I'm good. What else? Do they go through all of the financial information that you have, the houses you've bought, the nannies you've had? Have you had a housekeeper? How'd you pay the housekeeper? That's pretty, it's pretty thorough. And then once you get to that, and a famous example of where this didn't happen was with Sarah Palin, is that you like to see what their policy positions are like in the present day and ask them, do you both believe the same thing? If you don't believe the same thing, can you get on board with what the president believes, And so I think those are all the major component parts of vice president. But if you go back in time, if there is a movie that I would suggest that shows a failure of vetting, it is the movie Game Change on HBO, which is about how John McCain, who's a lovely person, ended up with Sarah Palin. It's it's an older movie, so you guys were probably pretty young when it came out, but you should check it out.
Well, definitely. So as a political commentator, what are your initial impressions of the Biden administration?
Oh my God, I think they're doing a really good job. Look, I mean, I'm a very progressive person, and so there are always places where I'm like, oh, like take it up another 10% or like turn it up a notch. But like, here's what we have to understand. Like, well, and also I wish that commentators would stop comparing it back to 2009 with the Obama. They're trying to drive a wedge, and it's like all we can do to not go out there and defend ourselves and be like, you're forgetting what it was like at the time. You know, if we had gone bigger with the Recovery Act, would we have ever gotten healthcare done? You know, I mean, those all also, it was not a crisis. You know, that crisis to people felt man-made by the banks, who were the villains, rightly. This is a global pandemic, so it's not really apples to apples in the comparison. But I mean, look, I am so happy. Actually, I'm really happy that I'm still upright for you guys, because I had my Moderna vaccine a couple days ago. I'm not going to lie. It's taken a little bit of a toll. I was dragging ass earlier today, but like, you know, here I am. I'm 45 years old. I am vaccinated. It is April 6th, whatever it is. You know, every person I know has had at least one shot. That's an incredible feat, considering that several months ago, we had a president who told us the pandemic was a hoax, even as he was at Walter Reed Hospital being treated for this pandemic. So I think they're doing a really good job. I think it's such hard work that they're undertaking. They have a crisis at the border. They've got a pandemic. They have, you know, I mean, it's so much. And I'm really proud of the progress that they are making. The only slight criticism that I would make is that you've read the reports that there are some vetting around White House employees. They're saying there are issues with people who've smoked marijuana, and I really object to anyone getting dinged for having smoked weed, especially if they're from a state where it's legal. So I have offered to go back if they ever want me to and be the weed czar who helps make marijuana federally legal properly in an equitable way, with equality and appropriate criminal justice reform, expungement of records and all of that. But that's the only place I would give them a little I love you, bud.
That is too funny. So I guess in addition to having the Biden administration ease their concerns over marijuana with employees, what policy or policies are you most engaged with right now and most hoping to see get done over the next 3.5 years?
I think for me, the most important thing is I'd like to see the recovery from the pandemic is going to take so much longer than I think people understand. And we have to be laser focused on that, and people are going to get fatigue. I mean, what else do I want to see? I mean, look, it's going to be so hard to solve the problem at the border. It's going to take working with countries where folks are fleeing from to sort of stop the mass migration. Hold on, you guys. I'm getting a reverb. Can you hear me okay? Shake. Okay. You know, and so I think that the pandemic, I'd love to see some movement made on student debt. I'd like to see a minimum wage. I mean, if I were to pick one thing I think is so important, it is a minimum wage that is actually livable for people. I saw just the other day, one of my favorite, if you guys want politicians who are not in America to follow, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand is my favorite, because she just keeps solving problems. And so, granted, I am not comparing America to New Zealand. I'm not. But it is amazing to see, when you have the full force of the presidency behind you, what you can do. So also, if we don't get some fucking gun legislation in this country soon, I have no idea why anyone needs an AR-15 or whatever number is the worst. But it's like, this is crazy. I have a lot of friends. I've been to Boulder. What happened in Atlanta, and the fact that I think there are like 10 more mass shootings that have happened since Atlanta. So I think those are the biggest issues. Also, let's just keep our eyes on filibuster reform.
Now that's something I think a lot of people can get behind. So final question for this section of the discussion. Are you considering to return to politics?
Would I return to politics? Well, I mean, at this rate, I couldn't because I've smoked weed. No, I'm just kidding. No, you know what? I'm enjoying my life right now. I would never say never. I love it so much. You know, I've often said to Pfeiffer and Favreau that, you know, I would love if only to go back and work for 6 months or a year and enjoy the things that we were almost too young to have been able to enjoy when we were there the first time. It is the most special place on the planet. And so it would be nice to go back and be like, you know, back in the day, we were like, we can't go to that event in the East Room because we have to stay at our desks and work. And like, the truth is we could have gotten up and gone over. And, you know, sometimes we did, but mostly we were real martyrs about seeing who stayed the latest and worked the hardest. And so I'd love to go back and just enjoy it a little bit more. And also like maybe make me the weed czar. We can solve some problems.
Well, we have certainly learned a lot about the ins and outs of the political world, and from both the government and media perspectives. Both the members of PSSA and SoPo are extremely fascinated with your journey, and some are likely wanting to go into a political career. So we are wondering, what is the best way, in your opinion, for people who want to get involved in politics to start? And going off of that, how would one get or go out of, you know, making a career out of politics?
So one of the things, look, I have had, whether it was when I was White House deputy chief or all the years since I have left, I've gotten more than my fair share of how do I be you by the time I'm 35. And the truth is, that's a terrible way to look at life. I never would have ended up where I ended up if I had had that perspective, right? And so for me, part of what got me there was that I really only worked for people I believed in. You know, whether it was John Kerry or Barack Obama, there's not one person back in 2000, late 2004 or early 05 who would have said, if you want to work for someone who's going to be president someday, go work for Barack Hussein Obama, junior senator from the great state of Illinois. One, because I mean, it just seems so improbable, as many of his speeches detail. And so, but the thing about it is, if you go work for someone, whether on a campaign or in elected office that you totally believe in, you'll never feel that let down. Do you know what I mean? Like, even when we were in the White House and people told Barack Obama that going for healthcare was political suicide, he's like, well, I'd rather lose trying than not try at all. And I think that even if he had lost, I would have been very sad to be unemployed, but I'd always be so proud to have been, you know, I'm part of that journey with him and to be in that fight with him. And so I think that for anyone who's thinking about it, it's just so vitally important that you find someone that you can really, you're like, okay, I fucking get this person. Like, I'm down with this person. And, you know, start at the most local level, find a city councilor or a mayor or, you know, anybody who is talking about things that really motivate you. That's what I would say.
That's a great piece of advice, definitely to take along for some of our members here. And going off of that, what is one thing that we should be looking forward to politics-wise in the next coming years?
Politics-wise, well, maybe soon we'll have our first female president. You know, I think one of the most important things about politics as it's evolving now is that we keep pushing for change. You know, one of my favorite races that I got involved in was back in 2018 when I supported Cynthia Nixon in the primary for governor here in New York State against Andrew Cuomo. And it's not that I had any real beef with Cuomo. It's that Cynthia was saying things that really spoke to me. And the truth is, any political consultant, I'm like, okay, political consultants, I mean, they're getting paid to have opinions, so I don't know about that, but they would have been like, there's no way she can win. Fine. I actually didn't care, because the truth is that she got people so energized and she got media coverage that people were listening to her ideas. And so she actually moved Cuomo to the left, right? Ultimately, got him to agree that legalizing marijuana was a thing, got him to agree that criminal justice reform should be a thing. And so, to me, I think that the power we have seen in organizing over the past couple of years is so vital that I just think it's a bit of a sidebar, but I think to anyone who is interested also, don't overlook the organizations that are having such an impact right now. One of my dearest friends is like the chief at the Working Families Party here in New York. And she's just a fucking genius. And she is, for any of you who saw it, it was one of my favorite projects during this last election. It was her idea to do the movement called Joy to the Polls, where they brought music and dancing and food and beverage to the polls that were, exceedingly long in many places. And there are just so many ways to have an impact that, 10 years ago, I never would have thought helping get Barack Obama's playlist for the Joy to the Polls Spotify would have been a real contribution, but it was, and so I think that there are so many ways to participate. Just, keep your eyes open, and especially on social media, follow people who you're like, fuck, I think that person's cool, and see what they're doing. And so I would say, I think that organizing's always been important. I think that organizing is making the change that we are seeing. And so join an organization and help organize for the change that you really want to see.
Right. And another question that we have, kind of going off of what you said, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received and that you want to pass along to all the Badgers watching?
Oh, the best piece of advice I've ever received. My best piece of advice, I think, goes back to something I said earlier, which is there are two things. One, always be curious. You are not the center of the universe. The person next to you, their story is just as important as your story. And especially in these times that are so divisive, always lead with curiosity. It's so easy to get into a fight, but sometimes it's interesting and it helps bridge a gap if you try to find out why a person believes what they believe. Now, I'm not talking about like QAnon supporters. Those people are an utterly lost cause, but people who have genuine differences, I think that leading with curiosity, you will never go wrong. And also another thing that my team on the campaign and in the White House, we always felt is wherever you are, whether it's at Madison, or if you're on a campaign and you're in a city or a state, always leave wherever you are better than you found it. And I don't have to explain that because you know in your heart when you're there what it means, but just, it's even my little tagline on Instagram because it means so much to me, but just like always leave it where you found it. And like listen to the Grateful Dead because that helps too.
Gotcha. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and take a few questions from the audience in the small amount of time that we have left. The
Sure.
first question is kind of doubles back a little bit to what you mentioned about vice presidential selections. I know that back during the presidential actual Democratic primary, Kamala Harris was a very strong critique of now President Biden.
Yeah.
What do you think the conversation was like in the room to decide on her to be the vice president? That kind of seems like a rather difficult conversation to have.
As both, I think Hillary Clinton said it, Barack Obama said it, when they faced off against each other, like campaigning's campaigning, and you're there to illustrate differences and the people decide. And I know that I don't remember the exact conversation, but I remember that Joe Biden was asked about it. And he was kind of like, in typical Joe Biden fashion, he was like, that's campaigning, man. Like, that's how it happens. Now, I think that if I were a candidate picking a vice president, that would not have been my view. I would have been much pettier than that. But I do think that for them, it really actually wasn't that big a deal.
Great. Yeah, great. A question that I had, just personally.
Sure.
Did you ever get to meet the Obama's dogs?
Of course. Sonny and Bo. For sure. Okay, so I'm going to tell you guys a secret, a secret story that you can't tell anyone. Because this is not for social media. This is for Badgers only. But when they first got Bo, we were all so obsessed with Bo. And Bo used to come into the West Wing early in the morning. And what we didn't know was that each of us was giving Bo bacon because we were trying to lure Bo into our offices so he'd come visit us. But I didn't know it. I didn't know Dan was doing it. We didn't know that other people were doing it. And then Bo got a tummy ache and had to go to the vet. And the first lady was like, "You stop giving him bacon." But yes, I got to see Bo and Sunny plenty. They were super adorable.
That is too funny. Sorry to hear about Bo's stomach, though. So what are some of the best ways to encourage more women to get involved in politics? And do you think the conversation is different with women in the room, whether it be in the media boardroom, in the situation room, wherever it is?
Yeah, so it's so funny you asked this. You didn't know this, but we talk about this with Secretary Clinton on the podcast, where she basically says, here's what you have to think about, because the media is so much harder on women when you're running, right? And it's a deterrent. It's like, look, I don't want people just saying lies about me. Like, that's terrible. But she's like, here's the thing. Every time I've run, there's been the shit that was true. People called me out on a decision I made or my record, and that is all fair game. And if you don't have like not tenacity, but if you are not the kind of person, and I personally don't know that I'm that kind of person, who could get in knowing that even things that are completely on the table to be called out on, that you will be called out on, it may not be for you. And I really don't like being attacked on any level, so I might not be for me. But if you can, if you're like, you know what, fuck it, those were my decisions, I own them, I wear the jacket, like that's fine, then you really just have to be able to separate and block out the noise the best you can when it comes to the other garbage. It's like, look, if, one of the interesting things, back to the podcast about picking a vice president, I mean, Geraldine Ferraro, who was Walter Mondale's vice presidential pick back in '84, she would be the first one to tell you they criticized what they talked about, what she wore, how she talked, that she was shorter. I mean, it's like crazy things. And so the truth is, when women run, this is the biggest tongue twister. When women run, women win. And so, and now if you look at the past couple of cycles we've had in Congress, it's so important we got those women in and we have to keep them in. It's unfortunate. One of the books I read when I was in Madison was called Running Scared. And it was about how people are always, if you're in Congress, you always have to be raising money. And I was like, that's wild. And then I got into it. I'm like, this is terrible. One of the best parts of the New York City mayor's race that's going on right now is actually the city matching funds, which make it a little bit more equitable to get good candidates in the race. But, for women, I think there's such a stronger network now than there probably was, years ago. So if women want to do it, they should just do it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, listen, we don't want to cut you off, but unfortunately we are at time. For the audience at home watching that probably wants to hear more of you, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Alyssa Mastro44 and on Instagram at Mastro175.
Awesome. And where can they find your podcast?
Our podcast is Hysteria on the Crooked Media Network, and it can be found on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome.
All right. Well, both PSSA and SoPo would like to thank you and take the opportunity to thank you, Alyssa, for an amazing evening of conversation. We have learned so much about your incredible career path, and you've given such invaluable advice and recommendations to many students pursuing political and media careers. Again, thank you so much.
You guys were great moderators. I had to interrupt. You were very good.
Thank you. Thank you. And yes, again, thank you for taking the time to speak with us and answering our questions tonight.
Bye, you guys. Thank you so much. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa.
If you would like to learn more about both the Society and Politics Committee of the Wisconsin Union Directorate and the Political Science Student Association here at UW-Madison, follow us on Instagram at the following usernames: WUDSOPO UW or SoPo, and PSSA UWMADISON on Instagram again. And if you'd like to give us any feedback, or if you would be interested in learning about either of our organizations, please take the time to fill out the feedback form, which is in the comments section. And we would also like to thank Wheelhouse Studios and the Wisconsin Union for allowing us to use this space tonight and providing this space. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good night, everyone.